Good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Hevler, and I'm an infectious disease physician and scientist and director of the AIDS Research Institute, the umbrella organization for all HIV activities at UCSF. On behalf of my co-chair and dear colleague, Dr. Monica Gandhi, who's director of CFAR and Ward 86, we welcome you to the 2021 World AIDS Day program. A special welcome to Chancellor Hallgood, Dean King, Chair of Medicine Wachter, Drs. Levy and Bulberding, and their families. World AIDS Day was a brainchild of a San Franciscan, James Bunn, a journalist who pitched the idea at WHO in 1988. Since then, every year on December 1st, all around the world, there are events to bring awareness to HIV. Scientific advances have been stunning, and the challenges ahead remain daunting. Certainly, the AIDS pandemic is not over. 38 million people living with HIV, 1.5 million new infections every year. We at UCSF remain steadfast in our commitment to overcome this disease. After all, we were among the first to respond, the first to describe the virus, the first to open a clinic for HIV, the first to say we need to treat everyone, the first to start a substantial cure program, the first to launch a citywide effort to end the pandemic, and the first to seriously invest in societal and social science aspects and behavioral aspects of this disease. In our two-part program today, we will first do tributes to UCSF giants, Drs. Levy and Bulberding. Then we will spotlight a few of our investigators working on the cutting edge of AIDS research. And if we could advance next slide, please. So Dr. Levy was born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware. He had a twin brother, Stuart. Note the identity ruse on the upper right-hand screen, who himself became one of the greats in drug resistance and infectious diseases. His sister Ellen, shown in the lower left, is a physician and practices in the Dominican Republic. Jay graduated with high honors from Wesleyan University, went to Paris for a research fellowship. He earned his MD from Columbia and did his residency at Penn. He worked at the National Cancer Institute and then came to UCSF in 1972. He met his incredible wife, Sharon, shortly thereafter, and they were married in Philadelphia. You will hear more about Jay's many scholarly contributions and accolades, but let me tell you a little bit more about Jay. Next slide, please. Education and mentoring his trainees have always been a central focus for Jay. His trainees have started virology laboratories around the world as a result of his efforts. Let me read you a quotation from one of his trainees and now very successful scientist, Susan Barnett. Jay's vibrant, productive, and highly collaborative laboratory was where I wanted to be doing research. So many of the early observations made in Jay's lab were seminal in setting future research directions in the HIV field, and I will forever be grateful to him for inspiring me to redirect my career path to infectious diseases and HIV and AIDS research. Jay's enormously generous and always providing words of encouragement, for which I have personally appreciated. Next slide. What you may not know about Jay is he is truly a Renaissance man. He's fluent in 5 languages: French, Italian, Hebrew, Spanish, and English. In 1987, he went to Africa for 3 months, met with health professionals on the front line and some very important creatures. He's an intellectual. Look at the essay, Conversations with Samuel Beckett. He's an artist. He designs these hearts on the upper right, a connoisseur of old cars, and is active in international organizations, fulfilling his lifelong ambition of being both a scientist and a diplomat. He has had a profound influence, not only on the science, but on a generation of scientists. Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here to pay tribute to these great scientists. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Paul Bulberding and some things that you actually may not know, because I think we know a lot about both of these great scientists. So Paul Bulberding, shown here on the left as a very young baby, grew up in Minnesota, and he had 5 children in his family, one of which has passed, but he's very close to all 4 of his remaining siblings. And very prominently, he has always loved animals. He's always been good with animals. And this is a picture 2 years in a row of him winning the 4-H club championship for his very amazing heifer that you can see here pictured. This is, again, 2 years in a row. Next slide, please. In terms of what his background was prior to coming to UCSF, Paul went to the University of Chicago for college and was, like many people at Chicago, thinking about a career in humanities, but then went to the University of Minnesota eventually for medical school, and there worked with Dr. Charlie Muldow, who is a great scientist in the field of retrovirology. So this is prior to the description of HIV. He's always been interested in retroviruses. Then he went to the University of Utah for residency. We share a Utah connection, but always wanted to come to the West and was angling to come to San Francisco for his fellowship, where he did and came for his oncology fellowship and was a fellow in Dr. Jay Levy's laboratory, where again worked on retroviruses, his longstanding interest. His academic accomplishments will be summarized by our chancellor and dean and chair, but wanted to give a little more aspects of his personal. Here he is in Kenya on the bottom left, where he, through his CFAR accomplishments, helped set up a laboratory. And here he is, how dedicated he is to his family. On the upper left is his son, Ben, and on the bottom right is at his daughter's Emily's wedding. And he loves animals. It's too hard to have dogs right now, but he has these beautiful cats. Next slide. And in terms of more of the personal, because that is so much of who Paul is. He met his physician wife, Dr. Molly Cook, when they were on the CRI rotation, the very hard rotation in the Cancer Research Institute during UCSF residency. And they have these 3 wonderful and accomplished children, Alex, Ben, and Emily. And then on the upper right side is showing you some of what Paul's doing during his emeritus time, which is caring for his granddaughter, Madeline, and his second grandchild is due this week. And he loves animals, travel, family, and it's really been an honor for me to have been mentored by Paul Voberding since I came here in 1996. I consider him a long-term clinical mentor. Thank you very much. So the next part of our program is we're very honored to have Dr. Anthony Fauci pay a lovely tribute to Drs. Levy and Paul Voberding. He was going to be here live, but then Omicron variant was described on Thanksgiving Day, and he is busy saving the world. So he has recorded really lovely remarks that we're going to show you here now in this next video. Thank you.
It is a great pleasure and in fact an honor on this World AIDS Day commemoration to have the opportunity to pay tribute to 2 individuals, Jay Levy and Paul Voberding, who over the 40 years that I have known them have become valued colleagues and friends. Although we lived on separate coasts, we were brought together in common purpose 40 years ago when our country and the world were challenged with what would become an historic era in the annals of public health. We shared a bond that few people who are active today in medicine and science can say that they have experienced. We were there at the beginning, and we responded literally from the very first days of the pandemic. The early years of Jay's career paralleled much more closely my own. He finished his residency at UCSF in 1971, and I completed my chief residency at the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, now Weill Cornell Medicine, in 1972, 1 year later. Paul, the young guy among us, was just graduating from the University of Chicago. Over the next 9 to 10 years, Jay and I pursued careers in immunology and molecular virology, respectively, while Paul was finishing medical school at the University of Minnesota, completing his medical residency and fellowship in oncology, and preparing to build a division of oncology at the San Francisco General Hospital in the summer of 1981. And then, in that summer of 1981, the careers and lives of all 3 of us changed dramatically. We all got swept up in the whirlwind of HIV/AIDS, which was not called AIDS at the time, nor did we have any idea what HIV was. And so, let me give you my perspective from the East Coast on what I had witnessed happening here at UCSF back then, at the San Francisco General Hospital, and the San Francisco community in general. Among other UCSF colleagues, Jay and Paul emerged over the years as truly iconic figures in the basic sciences and clinical care and investigation surrounding persons with HIV. To appreciate the full magnitude of their contributions, let us go back to the early 1980s, when San Francisco was the epicenter of the HIV epidemic in this country. As we know, previously healthy young individuals were dying despite our best efforts to provide all the supportive treatments available to us at the time. There were no established HIV centers available to provide the crucial care that was so urgently needed. And then, in 1983, Paul, Don Abrams, and the late Constance Woofsy founded the now legendary Ward 86. This was the first interdisciplinary AIDS-dedicated inpatient clinic in the world. With the subsequent expansion to Ward 5B, the San Francisco model, as it was called, became renowned as the best HIV patient care model in the world. Now, nearly 40 years later, this comprehensive model is the gold standard of interdisciplinary care around the world for complex diseases ranging from cancer to Alzheimer's disease and many more. And so what happened here at UCSF was truly historic. At that time, Cliff Lane, Henry Mazur, and I were deeply immersed in the care of desperately ill AIDS patients at the NIH Clinical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. And so we could fully appreciate even then the groundbreaking and truly transformative work that was being done by Paul and his colleagues here in San Francisco. To this day, I still am in awe of the creativity, the boldness, the risk-taking, and above all, the compassion that went into the creation of the San Francisco model. Concurrent with the cultivation of the San Francisco model was the collaborative environment of San Francisco's AIDS research community that supported Jay Levy and his monumental discovery of HIV in symptomatic patients and in asymptomatic individuals in certain risk groups. Published just a few months after the science papers of Bob Gallo and his colleagues. I often think it's just too bad that the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology cannot be given to more than 3 persons, or you would have had another Nobel laureate here at UCSF. Over the years, through multiple national and international conferences, workshops, collaborations, and the real camaraderie that was established among the then relatively small group of AIDS researchers in the early 1980s. I formed lifelong friendships with Jay and Paul based on admiration and respect, even though we were on distant coasts of our country. But their work did not stop with Ward 86 or with the discovery of HIV. In the mid-1980s, there was still so much we did not know about HIV treatment. Paul co-directed one of the flagship AIDS clinical trial groups at UCSF, where he led the pivotal ACTG-019 trial that changed clinical practice by demonstrating that the antiretroviral drug AZT was safe and effective in delaying the onset of AIDS in asymptomatic individuals with HIV. The results were truly game-changing. In 1988, Paul became the principal investigator and co-director of the UCSF Gladstone Center for AIDS Research in San Francisco, a national network coordinated by my institute and other NIH institutes. He was instrumental in creating and building the center, which is a premier research institution that also serves as a model for ensuring high standards of ethical research and patient safety. Paul's early leadership in the International AIDS Society, serving as its second president from 1990 to 1992, meant he had to navigate the tumultuous waters of a deadly pandemic, the uneven scientific progress, an understandably frustrated populace, and the repercussions of unpopular political decisions, something that I certainly can understand. In 2012, he became the director of the UCSF AIDS Research Institute and director of research for the UCSF Institute for Global Health Sciences. Under Paul's leadership, the AIDS Research Institute became the home for a unique initiative to cure HIV infection funded by AMFAR, which is the Foundation for AIDS Research. Now, what about Jay? Early in his career, Jay was a staff scientist at the NCI here at the NIH. We conducted research on DNA and RNA cancer viruses. And after moving to UCSF, Jay discovered xenotropic viruses and introduced a new paradigm in virology, an extraordinary accomplishment. Over the next 40 years, Jay and his colleagues at the Laboratory of Tumor and AIDS Virus Research dedicated their efforts to understanding human retroviruses, such as HIV. Not only did he co-discover HIV, but his work also has uncovered a novel immune response that controls HIV infection through the production of an antiviral factor by CD8-positive lymphocytes. But besides his groundbreaking discoveries in HIV research, Jay always has been a valuable voice in scientific discussions, a critical thinker who takes the 40,000 feet approach to science by asking the key, penetrating questions. In addition, he is known as very generous in his mentoring of young scientists. I have always admired that about him, and actually I still do. And so it has been my great pleasure to participate, even in a small way, in this well-deserved tribute to two individuals who have made historic contributions to the field of HIV/AIDS. It is also fitting that we honor them here on the 40th anniversary of their extraordinary journey. Paul and Jay, it has been my pleasure and honor to have interacted and learned from you during the multiple crossroads of this journey. Thank you, and keep up your great work.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for those remarkable remarks, and thank you for the work that you are doing in leading the world in the current pandemic around COVID-19. My name is Sam Hoggett. I'm the Chancellor here at UCSF, and it's my job now to add just a few more words to those that you've heard about the remarkable Professor Jay Levy. Before I do that and then introduce Jay to make some comments of his own, I would like to pick up on a theme that Dr. Fauci brought up, and that is the fact that in the early 80s, and I arrived at UCSF from Monash University in Melbourne in 1981, just as the AIDS pandemic was really getting underway, to comment on his remarks that it was a historic era, and investigators who dedicated their lives subsequently to HIV formed a bond. It's a bond that I think was generational shaping, even for those of us who were watching from the periphery and were not directly involved in either AIDS research or therapy. My wife, Jane, was a social worker in the AIDS clinic on Parnassus Avenue in the early 80s. So I had indirect understanding of the toll that the pandemic was taking. But I think watching our colleagues dedicate their lives in new ways gave new meaning to the word collaboration at UCSF. And I think it was not only career defining for those investigators who dedicated their lives to HIV research, but I would say it was institution defining in setting a new culture, a new expectation of what UCSF as a premier public health science university needed to do to keep the world a safer place. Those who dedicated and have dedicated their lives to HIV research, whether it was the community engagement, the advocacy, the basic science, the clinical translational work, or the care, really set the foundation for UCSF some 40 years later to be again a world leader in the response to another viral pandemic. So I just thank Jay and Paul, but also all of the others that are on this program today for their remarkable commitment to a difficult disease, but they're paving the way for UCSF to emerge in the modern era as a truly collaborative institution. So now a few words about Jay. You've heard eloquently from Diane about some of his non-professional achievements and interests, which are truly remarkable. I didn't quite know that he could speak 5 or 6 languages. Makes the rest of us feel somewhat limited. But you've also heard from Dr. Fauci, his remarkable scientific achievements. So I'll be relatively brief, but we'll repeat some of what's been said because it is truly a remarkable career. You've heard that in 1983, Jay independently discovered the AIDS virus that he originally called the AIDS-associated retrovirus. This came following his foundational early work when he discovered that xenotropic viruses introduced a new paradigm in virology. He confirmed that germline transmission of inherited or endogenous retroviruses was possible, and that paved the way for the use of these and related viruses in human gene therapy that is still being scientifically researched today. After the discovery of the virus, Jay very importantly pioneered heat treatment studies that demonstrated how to heat inactivate HIV in clotting factor preparations, an approach that protected many hemophiliacs from HIV and for which he received the Murray Thielen Award from the National Hemophilia Foundation. He was also the first to report the presence of the HIV virus in the brain and bowel and linked the virus presence in those tissues to diseases and symptoms from the presence of the virus. His group was also the first to demonstrate, as Dr. Fauci said, the ability of a CD8 positive lymphocytes in healthy infected people to control HIV replication by a non-cytotoxic mechanism. Jay has published over 600 papers and is the author or editor of 14 books dealing with viruses and immunology. Among them, acclaimed 4-volume series, The Retroviridity, and his seminal sole-authored book, HIV and the Pathogenesis of AIDS, that has now been translated into several languages. Jay is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Academy of Microbiology, to name just a few. He has received numerous prestigious awards at his Wesleyan alma mater, at UCSF, and at other organizations such as the American Foundation for AIDS Research. He is a member and participates in programs of the World Affairs Council and the Council on Foreign Affairs. He is an AIDS advisor in several countries, including India, China, France, Italy, Mexico, Ethiopia, the Dominican Republic, and Thailand. Jay has been truly an outstanding citizen, an outstanding representative for UCSF on the world stage. And it's just an enormous pleasure for me to participate in this ceremony, recognizing his remarkable career and his remarkable contributions. So Jay, I will now turn the Zoom room over to you to make a few remarks.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm overwhelmed by the introduction. Diane, thank you so much. And I have some words to say to Tony if you were here, to remind him of when we first met in 1982 at a meeting organized by Albert Sabin. And we were talking about a very serious disease. No one knew what it was the cause, and so forth. And you, after the many years, were very supportive of our research program here at UCSF. And I have been really so thrilled to see you are of advice and compassion for other epidemics that have happened to the world community. We thank you for your courage and your advice. So this World AIDS Day, it is humbling and gratifying to be honored by this group and to honor my research fellows who worked in HIV/AIDS over the past 40 years. Most of us never suspected that a human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, would be the cause of the disease syndrome. Its identification involved researchers here at UCSF and from the US government, both of which were reluctant to recognize the disease affecting many Americans. It was really the response of the state of California that made a difference. Researchers at UCSF and many throughout the world independently took on the public health challenge and made major discoveries and developed diagnostic and therapeutic approaches to help mitigate the consequences of HIV infection. I'll cite here what Sam said is collaboration at UCSF was fantastic and was a model for AIDS programs throughout this country and elsewhere. Those responses now help to inform current investigators of the most recent COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, again, the lack of early attention to the COVID infection delayed the needed response for controlling this new public health challenge. For those of us who witnessed HIV/AIDS at the beginning, the achievements made in discovering and understanding HIV pathogenesis and developing diagnostic tests and the antiviral therapies are remarkable. They have helped to reduce the deaths from the viral infection so that today, most infected individuals, particularly in economically privileged countries, can survive with normal lifetimes. The fact that an AIDS vaccine has not yet been developed for this viral infection highlights the difficulty we all recognize. When you have an agent that infects an individual and becomes rapidly established within the genetic material of many of the cells in the body. Thus, the goal is to eliminate or control these virus-infected cells. They are agents of the transmission and the disease. In that sense, I remind people that the fields of infectious disease and cancer overlap. The focus is on controlling the pathogenic or disease-causing cell. We have never been faced with this particular biologic activity of a microbe in which a viral infection immediately creates a stable infection and many cells acting as reservoirs in the body are there to continue the agent's presence and its disease. So remember this in terms of many questions. Why do we not have a vaccine for HIV? Remember, when it infects, it becomes part of the body, of the genetic makeup of the cell. And we have to destroy or control those cells. I hope in the future that innovative approaches will consider the known ability of some HIV-exposed individuals. And here's where I see an important direction in the future. They ward off the infection, these exposed individuals, and they're protected from a natural antiviral infection. They are protected by a natural immune response. These HIV-exposed uninfected individuals merit special attention for future approaches at immunotherapy, a vaccine, and a cure. For example, these individuals have what Sam and Diane had mentioned, a CD8 cell antiviral response that does not involve cell killing, but is extremely powerful in controlling HIV so that they have no symptoms and can live a normal lifetime. This CD8 non-cytotoxic antiviral response, which we call CNAR, has been an innate immune response that has been so protective. And I am pleased that the labs of Alex Marson and Jimmy Yee will be continuing the studies of CNAR here at UCSF. I thank the ARI and the AIDS community for giving me and my research colleagues this recognition. I'm particularly pleased to share it with my former student and accomplished HIV/AIDS clinician, Paul Voberding. As mentioned, Paul joined my lab in 1980 as a hem-onc fellow, learning about retroviruses causing immune disorders and cancer in mice. We did not know then that we would soon be working together on a human retrovirus. I'm really very proud of his achievements. My hope is that students today and in the future will become acquainted with the history of HIV/AIDS pandemic and contribute new ideas in its therapy and prevention. Importantly, they will be better prepared to handle the next pandemic that surely will occur as we continue to face the struggle between microparasites and macroparasites that exist together on this planet. Now, before I close, I'm going to surprise everybody. I would like to give a very special thanks to my marvelous wife, Sharon, picture you saw, who has been at my side for these 40 years. She knows well the challenges and the joy that came from these experiences in HIV/AIDS. Thank you so much.
So next, thank you so much, Jay. Next, Dr. Talmadge King, our dean, will come on to speak and give further remarks about Dr. Paul Voberding.
Well, good morning, everyone. And congratulations, Jay, and thank you so much for all of the outstanding work that you have done over these many years. So I have, you have heard a lot about Dr. Voberding's accomplishments and contributions to the UCSF and to the field of AIDS research. They're numerous and they're groundbreaking. Paul was working at San Francisco General as the AIDS epidemic hit the city, and he and Connie Woofsey co-founded the world's first AIDS clinic, Ward 86. Ward 86 pioneered a comprehensive medical model that involved primary and specialty care, social services, and case management. Continuing today, these providers treat not just the disease, but the person. Paul led clinical trials in HIV-related malignancies and went on to play a key role in the development of antiretroviral therapy. He was the PI and co-director with Warner Green of the NIAID-funded UCSF Gladstone Center for AIDS Research, supporting the large community of HIV investigators in San Francisco. And later as a director of the UCSF AIDS Research Institute, commonly known as ARI, he received the Amphar Institute for HIV Cure Research Award, a $20 million grant dedicated to finding a cure for HIV by 2020. As the director of the Amphar Institute, Paul worked with leading scientists at UCSF, the Gladstone Institute for Virology and Immunology, and Vitalant, formerly Blood Systems Research Institute, to identify successful approaches to the management of HIV/AIDS. Paul pioneered UCSF's Resource Allocation Program, the RAP program, which centralizes the announcement and application process for intramural funding opportunities to help the university make the most of its funding dollar. Paul then went on to serve as chief of the medical services at San Francisco VA Medical Center. He was also director of research for global health sciences at UCSF. He has been the longstanding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Acquired Immunity Deficiency Syndromes, and he served on many scientific boards, including Acardia Global AIDS Foundation and the Infectious Disease Institute at Macquarie University in Kampala, Uganda. Paul was a board member of Pangaea Global AIDS Foundation and was a founder and board chair of the International Antiviral Society, USA. He is a member of the National Academy of Medicine and a master of the American College of Physicians. So Paul, thank you so much. On behalf of the University of California, San Francisco and the School of Medicine and the many communities we serve, we sincerely thank you for all the work that you have done. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for being such a wonderful person and human being and colleague. So thank you so much, Paul. And I'll pass it to Dr. Robert Walker.
Thank you, Talmadge, and thank you to everyone putting this together. Special congratulations to Jay for all of his contributions. Say a few words about Paul and my own perspective. I think the thing I'm struck by most when I think about Paul's early days and look at the pictures was his youth. He was a baby. He was 31, just fresh out of fellowship, became the chief of oncology at San Francisco General Hospital, and this new disease exploded on his watch. And there was a massive number of unknowns, didn't know the cause and the prognosis and the treatment. And on top of that was layered remarkable politics and sociology that all had to be navigated. And Paul did that with exceptional skill. You've already heard about the San Francisco model, Ward 86, Ward 5B, his leadership in the clinical trials network that led to the early studies of AZT, all absolutely staggering. And he was so junior and he got it all right. It was really very, very impressive. I got to see Paul up close and personal when, in an act of administrative malpractice, he and John Ziegler asked me to help them run the International AIDS Conference that was going to be in San Francisco in 1990. They seemed like old guys at the time, but they were actually still quite young. But I was a fellow, so that was a bizarre choice. But I was naive enough to believe, and I don't think they did anything to dissuade me from this belief, that I would be putting together a scientific conference, choosing abstracts and putting on a scientific program. But Paul, I think, knew deep down that that was a part of what we would be doing, but a part of what we would be doing would be syncing up with all of the complex policy and politics and sociology of the early days of the AIDS and HIV epidemics. As I got a chance to watch Paul, because I was clueless about any of these things, I was wowed by watching him, by his empathy, by his ability to sit down with everything from the world's leading scientists to AIDS activists who were shouting at him and us, but actually sit down and truly listen to their concerns, not to blow them off, not to show a hint of arrogance, because I don't believe he has any in his body, but to serve as a bridge between patients and scientists and policymakers. I was wowed by his facility with the media. And I took this as a unique opportunity for me to see a masterclass in leadership, and not just the kind of academic leadership that we're used to seeing, but a different kind of leadership, and the kind of leadership that was actually critical to making progress in this complicated new world. Through it all, I think a theme of Paul's career has been collaboration and partnerships, and I saw that play out up close and personal, whether it was collaboration between bench scientists and clinical researchers. And as you've heard, Paul was kind of uniquely situated to do that, having a real skill and experience in both, between frontline clinicians and researchers, between different kinds of clinical folks, physicians, nurses, social workers, clergy, all the people that would have to be working together to make a difference, between academics and policymakers. And I think perhaps most importantly, between the academic, scientific, and policy worlds and the community of affected patients and others affected by the epidemic. I don't believe there was really a tradition in medicine until Paul came along to truly understanding the importance of that collaboration and to building it respectfully in a way that moved progress forward. In the face of the toxicity and partisanship of today's COVID politics, I think it's easy to airbrush our memories of the politics of AIDS, to remember the kumbaya moments and to forget the anger and the angst. But I can tell you there was plenty of both. But it was, it was contentious. It was scary. It was theatrical at times. I remember when the activists lowered a huge condom over Jesse Helms' house, which I thought was really pretty cool. And to kind of forget, the bathhouses, our own conference being the subject of an international boycott, the health secretary speaking at our conference and being drowned out by foghorns. But through it all, Paul remained a calm, purposeful, compassionate, articulate, and respected voice of reason and force for good. Talmadge has already mentioned many of Paul's accomplishments and leadership roles after the early days of HIV/AIDS, and I won't enumerate them, but just to point out how impressive that is in a way, because Paul, like a great childhood actor, could have had the pinnacle of his career in those early days, but went on to have really starring leading roles in all sorts of organizations and initiatives, both at UCSF, running the medical service at the VA, building the HIV/AIDS division into the world-class entity that it is today, throughout the department, the school, but also nationally and internationally. So Paul has been a towering leader and an inspiration to me and to hundreds of others, because of the contributions that he's made in science, but really in building the partnerships between all of the groups that needed to work together to address the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and as we see in COVID, are really needed to address any complicated pandemic. So Paul, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your friendship. And I'd love to hand it off to you and give you a chance to make some comments. Thanks so much.
Oh, Bob, thanks. Thanks so much. And Talmadge. And Bob, it's been great watching your own growth as a communicator. I think we've all had a chance to enjoy how articulate you've been in response to the COVID epidemic. I want to thank Diane and Monica for putting this together. I think we should do this every day. I sort of like it. I think you've heard enough about kind of a lot of the academic stuff of my career. I really just want to focus on people, because I think at my point in life, I think it's the people that you remember. It's the people that are the most important, and I want to come back to that. And you've heard a number of them mentioned already. I wish Tony was here. Tony has been a colleague and friend for, as he said, 40 years. But even before that, Tony, his work saved the life of my best friend in college, who was dying of Wegener's granulomatosis. And Tony, way before anything else, really came up with the idea of treating that disease with Cytoxan. And my friend's father died of ripe old age, having survived that fatal immunologic disease because of Tony. So I was impressed early on with the value of translational, what we now call translational research. Bob has already mentioned his role in the 1990 AIDS conference. I threatened to put this up on my shelf behind me, the way they do on national or public TV. Bob's book. Bob was absolutely spectacular, and as he said, helped us through this minefield of politics. So we had no idea going into it, I think. Talmadge helped me to stay here at UCSF. I was threatening to leave, and I'm really glad I didn't after my stint at the VA, and helped me enter the last phase of my career in a really in a graceful way, which was really important to me and my family. In terms of people, Molly, you've heard and seen. Molly and I met when I was a fellow. She was my R2 on the cancer ward at Parnassus. We fell in love. I'm not sure it was considered unethical at the time, but I was supervising her, but it didn't stop us. And she proved to be a great distraction. I remember sitting in Jay's lab and really preferring to leave and go home and hang out with Molly. It was the end of my lab life, but the start of my my real life, I guess, in a sense. She was a chief resident at the General with Chip Chambers under Merle Sandy before the AIDS epidemic started, and tells stories about hearing in Morning Report cases of what we now would easily call AIDS. And so when I started seeing patients, it was against the backdrop of work that she had done. Molly has herself had a great career in medicine, especially medical education and setting up medical services while raising 3 kids. And people kind of continually still ask, I think, how that can be possible. And people like Monica have also managed to do that, and Diane. So it is possible, but we have 3 wonderful kids. Alex, our oldest, was born 2 weeks before I saw my first patient with KS. Our kids are all AIDS kids in a sense. He's now in LA. Ben, our middle son, was born in 1984, before AZT. I think of things in those terms. Some of you on the early part of the program saw my granddaughter Madeline sitting on my lap, and today she said her first sentence. She said, "Let's go," which is pretty remarkable. Try to remember that. And Emily, our daughter, born in '87, the year of AZT's approval, just this morning, 12:03, had her first baby, our granddaughter Nora, born at the UCSF and in Walnut Creek at John Muir. So it's been quite a remarkable day already, and I really treasure this opportunity. My first patient with KS was admitted to the hospital just before I started on July 1st, 1981. In a sense, obviously, the rest is history. That was the start for me of my involvement in the AIDS epidemic. And I've many times thought about how impossible it is for people today to imagine what that was like in the early days. It's just impossible to describe. But imagine you're a young ID doc and you're seeing an expanding wave of cases of metastatic pancreatic cancer that are coming to you for their care. That's what it was like. They come with abdominal pain and jaundice. And what you can do is maybe decrease the jaundice a bit. Maybe you can control their pain and you can do nothing else. And you'll watch them die. They'll all die in a year. And that's what the epidemic was like. And my oncology background, I think, helped prepare me a little bit for that, but it was still an amazing thing. And then to go negotiate with the, as you heard about, the social setting of the epidemic, which is absolutely as important as anything else. Now, I'm going to really go quickly through some other people. It's always a danger to mention names. I'll leave out some of my favorite people, but Charlie Moldow was my mentor at Minnesota, a retrovirologist. We worked with the Rous sarcoma virus, and he, it turns out, was a college friend of Jay's identical twin brother, Stuart. So when it came time for me to choose my where I was applying for fellowship, Charlie is the one who directed me here and to Jay. So I really came to UCSF to work with Jay in his lab, and although it didn't work out with me in the lab, it was really an important start. And I remember, Jay, one morning, Thanksgiving morning, as I recall it, sitting in your little house on Telegraph Hill before you got married, with you helping me rewrite a grant, a Giannini grant that I got, but I spent Thanksgiving Day, and you were an incredibly generous mentor to help me do that. Merle Sandy, no one's mentioned Merle. Merle was hugely important. My first chief of medicine, he hired me the day after my fellowship ended to start an oncology division. Imagine how crazy that was, and I'm sure the other division chiefs wondered who this guy was that was taking this kind of risk. But he really gave me a free rope to to do whatever I wanted with, hang myself perhaps, but Merle was hugely important, an ID doc who appreciated more than a lot of other ID docs at the time of the importance of this epidemic. Connie Wafsy, who was not trained in ID, but was an ID specialist, and played an amazing role, was one of the first people to really think seriously about the impact of AIDS in women at a time when there were very few women in San Francisco with the disease. So, and Connie died of metastatic breast cancer just before the 1996 AIDS conference, where we heard for the first time of the real benefits of therapy. Donald Abrams, who I sometimes do, sometimes don't credit with being one of the co-founders of Ward 86. He came 6 months later, but he was truly one of the co-founders and brought a perspective in the gay community that we absolutely needed to have as we responded to the need for services. And Donald remains a dear friend, another Giants fan, and he would appreciate that my granddaughter today was born on a palindromic date, 12121. As it turns out, Donald is into numbers, as am I. And then the other characters are Merv Silverman, health department director, an inspirational person. Marcus Conant at UCSF, who way before anyone else was kind of aware of what was happening with KS. And the general, SFGH, really is a character in all of this, very much a personality, very centrally important, in ways that people have written about, but very important as part of the community and related to UCSF and the relationship of academics to a community response is something that I think we can be most proud of in our community's response to the epidemic. I was struck when we saw our first patients that they didn't have families. These were single gay men, estranged from their families, and yet they did have a family. The family was the community of which they were a part. And the community responded. It took organizations that were already here and pivoted to do response to HIV. We created new organizations with the gay community, Project Open Hand, AIDS Foundation, Shanti Project, and others that became really very much part of the community response, very much part of the San Francisco model response to this epidemic, and something that I think really did set San Francisco in a unique position. I'll close with just coming back to my family, because I think if I have any regrets, and I do, it's that I was so distracted. This happens, and I'm sure it's happening. Monica, I'm sure you're having the same thing happen with the COVID epidemic, that there's no way you have enough time to do everything. Molly raised our kids with me largely gone. I've accumulated more miles on United Airlines than I care to remember. But the family is at the end of the day really, really important, and they've been an incredible inspiration to me. When I was a kid, I grew up hearing about this thing called calling. My parents were devout Lutherans, and they talked about being called to the ministry. I wasn't called to that, but I really do think I was called to the AIDS epidemic, and it's been a privilege, and I really appreciate this opportunity today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for that very moving speech. I'm collecting myself for a moment. Hello again to all of you who have joined us today. My name is Malcolm John, and I'm Medical Director of Health Equity for UCSF Health and Director of the Black Health Initiative here at UCSF and the Men of Color Program at the HIV Clinic of Parnassus. The work of Jay and Paul and so many on this call here and others at UCSF is the reason I came here for fellowship and stayed on faculty, honed my interests and skills in tackling health disparities within HIV and how to effectively partner with community across institutions and silos, a key part of the UCSF model that we have already heard of, to make sure those most vulnerable benefit from the great work that is being done here and beyond in prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS. There's still much to be done, but I am so grateful to be a part of a community committed to this ongoing work that quite frankly has helped us in dealing with the COVID-19 disparities, again, by many on this call. With that, I want to personally say thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jay, for all that you've done and the times that we've been able to work together during my time here at UCSF. And I want to thank you to all our distinguished speakers for this morning. That ended the first half of our program, or this ends the first half of our program, where we have heard some powerful and well-deserved tributes to Drs. Paul Voberding and Jay Levy, both giants in their fields, as they enter their emeritus phases in their illustrious careers. We heard from the head of NIAID, Dr. Fauci, and our chancellor, dean, and chair of the Department of Medicine on various accomplishments, along with Diane and Monica, about family and personal lives that may put these great scientists' careers in context. We'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Eric Gooseby, who cannot be here with us today, as he is at the UN working on global vaccine equity, but has been a huge part of UCSF's policy and advocacy work in HIV since its inception and has partnered closely with Paul and Jay over the years. Now I'm tasked to move us on to the second half of the program, where we will be highlighting various accomplishments in HIV medicine and research at UCSF. This is by no means a comprehensive list of all the great work that is being done here over the past 40 years since the first description of the epidemic, but is meant to be representative of some of the work. We will start with a highlight on HIV prevention work done at UCSF by Dr. Mallory Johnson, who's Interim Division Chief of Prevention Sciences. And he will be introduced by Dr. Milo Santos, who will talk about his own work and highlight the great work done over the years in the UCSF School of Nursing. The talk will be followed by a talk by Dr. Susan Bookbinder, Director of Bridge HIV, on HIV vaccines, and she will be introduced by her mentee, Hyman Scott, who will also highlight his own accomplishments. Dr. Priscilla Hsu, Chief of the Division of Cardiology, will then talk about her own amazing work on HIV and comorbidities, and introduce Dr. Peter Hunt, who will focus more on HIV and inflammation and aging work that he's doing at UCSF. Dr. Fran Owika, an amazing scientist in the Department of Clinical Pharmacy, will talk about her own work in HIV and pharmacology, and introduce Dr. Annie Luckmeyer, who will highlight advances in HIV treatment. And finally, but not least, long-term HIV activist and community advisory board member, Brenda Lien, will highlight the work of the HIV Cure at UCSF, and Drs. Melanie Ott and Stephen Deeks will discuss their large cure programs. This will be followed by Q&A at the end. Thank you all again for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Milo Santos, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Community Health Systems in the School of Nursing at UCSF, where I conduct research on the intersection on substance use and HIV. From the earliest days of the epidemic through advances that have transformed HIV infection from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition, UCSF nurses and nurse scientists from the School of Nursing have played a critical role in improving HIV care on many levels and in many places. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the contributions of UCSF nurses and UCSF School of Nursing faculty as local and global leaders in HIV education, research, and patient care. And with this in mind, it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mallory Johnson, who is also part of the School of Nursing faculty, where he trains the next generation of nurse scientists who are now engaged in efforts to end the HIV epidemic. Dr. Johnson is professor in the UCSF Departments of Medicine and Community Health Systems, interim chief of Division of Prevention Studies, or CAPS, and the UCSF Center for AIDS Research, or CFAR. He is a behavioral medicine psychologist whose research focuses on understanding, measuring, and improving the health of persons at risk for and living with chronic diseases such as HIV. His research reflects the challenges of preventing HIV, initiating, adhering, and persisting with treatment, engagement in care, and integrating treatment and prevention challenges into patient psychosocial environments. He also has an active interest in mentoring diverse investigators in HIV research, myself included, and he has co-led the UCSF Mentoring the Mentors program for the past 10 years. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Mallory Johnson, who will be speaking about the current status of HIV prevention and PrEP research. Mallory, please take it away.
Thank you, Milo, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the ARI and CFAR for inviting me. Allegedly, I have control over my slides. There we go. Okay. So I have been asked to talk about HIV prevention in a very short period of time. So I am going to give a bird's eye view and see what we can do. And to quote Paul's granddaughter from earlier this morning, let's go, because we've got a lot to cover. All right. I thought I'd start just by reminding us of the ending the HIV epidemic, one of the central parts of which is to reduce new infections in the United States by 75% by 2025 and at least 90% by 2030. And if you think about where we last had data from 2019, we've got a sharp hill to go down here, and it's more of a hill decline, but it's in 2019, 34,800 new cases, and we're aiming to get down to no more than 3,000 and hopefully less than that. And if you think about the task, if you look at the 2025 interim goal, then it's even sharper. And so really, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we should really focus on the populations that are historically disparately affected. So still, it remains that Black and African American individuals and Latinx individuals are considerably disproportionately represented in new cases in HIV in the United States. And over time, there's been a pretty stable representation of MSM, men who have sex with men, and also transgender individuals throughout the HIV epidemic in the United States. And these trends are continuing. The focus on PrEP is hugely an important route that we can go to reduce new infections. And we have just a wealth of evidence of a number of modalities and populations and products of PrEP, and more coming. However, we still have lots of disparities in PrEP currently. So it's estimated that fewer than 25% of people who would likely benefit from PrEP in the US are actually taking PrEP. And we've got disparities in which, if you focus in on MSM, African American and Latino MSM are less likely to be aware of PrEP, less likely to have had a discussion with their providers about PrEP, and less likely to be using PrEP. We also have the challenges of PrEP persistence. This is continuing PrEP once someone has started. There's been a lot of progress, but there still remains a substantial drop-off in discontinuation of PrEP for people who started. And this is going to remain a challenge as we go forward. Long-acting PrEP modalities really offer a wide range of possibilities in the near and further future, including injectable PrEP with cabotegravir 8-week injections, likely to be approved shortly in the new year, and then other intramuscular and subcutaneous injections of other products as well. We have vaginal rings in the works, implants, microarray patches, long-acting monthly oral PrEP, and broadly neutralizing antibodies, which could be twice-yearly injections. However, all of these technologies come with challenges to equitable access and persistence in care. And there are going to be challenges retaining people in the context of long-acting PrEP. These are going to be critical as we move forward. It's also important to recognize that a need for alternatives to PrEP. Not everyone wants PrEP or might not be ready for PrEP. So we need to continue to focus on everyone and meet them where they are. Continued need for HIV prevention messaging and prevention, continued focus on treatment as prevention and U equals U, and this includes increased testing and treatment, post-exposure prophylaxis when indicated, and let's not forget about condoms. There was an analysis that came out earlier this year that estimated that 117 million infections worldwide may have been prevented through condom scale-up since 1990. So remembering that as part of our arsenal of tools. So as we think about getting close to ending the HIV epidemic, I believe the progress will become slower and more difficult. And I think of this in parallel to the last mile problem that we see in public transit planning. You may have a wonderful high-speed rail, you may have a subway system, you have an extensive bus system. However, if people don't have a way to get from their front door to the nearest entryway to that point, that's affordable, safe, and accessible and reliable, then it's going to be a challenge. So when we translate this to HIV, I quote the Smiths here, why is the last mile the hardest mile? In HIV prevention, as we continue to make advances with some segments of the population, those who remain are going to be increasingly burdened with poverty, housing instability, food insecurity, many other competing demands, substance use trauma, and lots of other factors that are going to be necessary to deal with. There are social, legal, and political contexts that are critical, and there's discrimination and stigma based on race, ethnicity, sexual identity, gender identity, HIV status, and a number of other variables. And importantly, there is the intersection of these in various ways that are not just additive, but are multiplicative and really pose challenges as we move forward. Not to mention the complicated and messy patchwork of health insurance programs that we have in the United States and the challenges in delivering prevention and care in this setting. So an important part of this is going to be community engagement, which should occur early and often from the earliest idea stage of new technologies and innovations and to scale up an implementation, not waiting until products are fully developed and protocols are finalized before bringing in community voices. And the community engagement should be representative, recognizing that there are many communities, there are many subsets and facets of communities, and that it's not monolithic. And that this involvement should be in meaningful ways. They should be central to the research teams, paid and credited for their roles. So we have a continued need for innovation, a continued need for focus on the multiple levels of factors that affect HIV prevention, intensified community engagement. We also have, we can't lose sight of the investigator pipeline. There is a lot left to do. People talk about ending the HIV epidemic, but we need intensified efforts to attract and retain new talent from diverse disciplines, and in particular, scientists who represent the communities most impacted. And that needs to span from training, recruitment, to retention in their fields. And we need to strengthen the policy to the science to policy connection. Quick plug for the Center for AIDS Prevention was just refunded, and the themes that we'll be prioritizing going forward really reflect these complicated dynamics that are going to be the challenges as we move forward. Similarly, the UCSF CFAR is up for review next week, very soon, and the new approach to the CFAR really does accentuate a lot of these complex issues with increased community engagement, with a housing instability scientific working group, an intersectionality scientific working group, and importantly, an underrepresented minority investigators group. So I focus mostly on the US, but every setting in which our investigators are working or need to work have their own set of challenges and complex dynamics that need to be carefully considered, and everything I said about the US applies there. I'd like to thank the host for inviting me for this, and I would like to thank those who contributed slides and content, whether they knew it or not, and also those who contributed slides and content that I didn't unfortunately have time to use. But thank you all. I look forward to hearing from our colleagues about the other important domains.
Hyman, are you here?
Yep. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce Susan Buchbinder. So I'm Hyman Scott. I'm a medical director of clinical research here at San Francisco Department of Public Health at Bridge HIV. I'm also an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Medicine. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Susan Buchbinder, who is an incredible scientist and also my mentor here. Dr. Buchbinder is the director of RIC HIV in the San Francisco Department of Public Health and a clinical professor of medicine, epidemiology, and biostats at the University of California, San Francisco. Her research has focused on risk factors for HIV acquisition and interventions to prevent HIV infection, including vaccines, PrEP, behavioral interventions, microbicides, and combination modalities. And she runs a clinical research site here in the DPH that is referred to as pluripotent in terms of the number of network that the site contributes to. And she has been in leadership positions within the HIV Vaccine Trials Network and the PTN, the HIV Prevention Trials Network. And within the Vaccine Trials Network, she serves on the executive committee. She has chaired numerous phase 1, 2, and 3 vaccine trials, and she currently serves as a chair and co-chair of 2 efficacy trials, which have been in the field. She's also led numerous PrEP studies, including the CDC-funded phase 2 study, a site for IPREX, and she has been on numerous HIV and NIH, UCSF advisory committees. As one of our staff members sort of refers to Dr. Buchbinder as the vaccine whisperer, as she is able to really describe and communicate complex scientific ideas in a way that is extremely accessible. She has mentored many early career scientists, including being a mentor for our current director of health, and she's been recognized through several mentoring awards. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Susan Buchbinder to talk about the current status of HIV vaccines.
Thank you so much, Hyman. We'll bring up my slides. So I'm going to be talking about where we are in 2021 with HIV vaccines. And I wanted to dedicate this to Scott Hammer, who unfortunately passed away last month. He was a former co-PI of the HIV Vaccine Trials Network and truly a giant in both therapeutics and vaccines. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different approaches to vaccines. First, vaccines that induce non-neutralizing antibodies, then infusing broadly neutralizing antibodies, and then vaccines that will hopefully induce broadly neutralizing antibodies. So we'll start with the non-neutralizing antibody approach because it's the only vaccine that we've seen so far that has actually provided significant protection against HIV. This is from the Thai RV144 trial that used a combination of canary pox with a GP120 boost. And at 12 months after infection, there was 61% reduction in HIV infections that dropped, unfortunately, by 3.5 years to 31%. So the idea was, could we take what we learned from the RV144 trial and translate it to a different region of the world? And so the ALVAC was reconfigured to include a subtype C virus. Then the GP120 was also reconfigured to be a bivalent subtype C. The alum was switched out for MF59 in an attempt to try to increase the potency. And then boosters were added at 12 and 18 months to increase the durability of the vaccine response. And this is the HVTN 702 trial schema. There were 5,400 South African women and men aged 18 to 35 who were enrolled. The primary vaccine regimen mirrored that of the RV144 trial. Boosters were given at months 12 and 18, and this now included the clade C ALVAC with the bivalent subtype C GP120. Now, unfortunately, as was published earlier this year, the vaccine was not proven to be effective. The vaccine is shown in red here in this Kaplan-Meier curve. The blue is the placebo, and you can see that these curves are virtually superimposable upon each other. But so there are a number of different possible explanations for why this might not have worked. The vaccines were different themselves, so it might have been some component of the vaccine or the adjuvant that was responsible for its protection in RV144. The viral genetics are different. It's a much more homogeneous infection in Thailand, and there's much higher diversity of the viral strains in South Africa, and so therefore a higher likelihood for the vaccine sequence mismatch relative to circulating strains. There are host genetic and host factor differences, including mucosal inflammation in the microbiome. And there are differences just in the force of infection in terms of HIV exposure, where the infection rate was about 10-fold higher in South Africa than it was in Thailand. So if you have a weakly effective vaccine, it might not have been able to provide protection against that high force of infection. And so in the meantime, we had been developing another vector-based vaccine, Ad26, that elicited a more optimal immune response. It included a mosaic insert to create a truly global HIV vaccine with components from viruses around the world, and then trimeric envelope proteins for improved humoral immunity. And what we saw from the non-human primate challenge studies is that this green line is the Ad26 prime with an Ad26 and GP140 boost, and it provided 94% protection against a rectal challenge in this non-human primate challenge study. And so on the basis of that, and on the basis of phase 1 and 2 vaccine data that indicated that we had a very robust immune response, 2 trials were launched: Imbokodo in 2,600 women in 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and Mosaico in 3,800 men who have sex with men and transgender individuals in 8 countries in North and South America and Europe. And you can see that this regimen with a tetravalent mosaic Ad26 vaccine was given at 4 time points, along with a clade C GP140 at months 6 and 12. That was a little bit different from the Mosaico trial that was otherwise identical, but includes a mosaic GP140 at month 6 and month 12. And unfortunately, a couple of months ago, we got data that there was no significant efficacy. Again, the vaccine is shown in red, the placebo in blue, and that was not significantly different. But the placebo rate of infection was over 4% per year, which again indicates why we so desperately need a vaccine for women in sub-Saharan Africa. So the Mosaico trial in transgender individuals and men who have sex with men in the Americas is still ongoing. It's fully enrolled. It does have some differences in that it's got this bivalent GP140 with a mosaic insert that does induce a broader humoral and cellular immune response. It's against a mainly clade B viral infection, and it's protecting against largely intrarectal transmission, which is similar to what was seen in the non-human primate challenge model. It also is possible that the force of infection will be lower in this study. We expect it will not be as high as it was in the South African trial. So we'll await results from that trial. In the meantime, we've also been infusing broadly neutralizing antibodies, and this is data from the AMP trial, which was passive infusion of VRC01, which is a CD4 binding site antibody that was infused every 8 weeks, with people coming in every 4 weeks for HIV testing. There were 2 sister trials, one in men and transgender persons who have sex with men in the Americas, and one in women at risk of HIV infection in sub-Saharan Africa. And these are data that show that the VRC01 did provide 60 to 80% protection against sensitive virus to the where there was an IC80 of less than 1 microgram per milliliter to VRC01, but the vaccine, the BNAB was not protective against viruses that were more resistant to VRC01. And so you can see that against more resistant viruses, the efficacy waned quite rapidly. So what this did tell us was it was a proof of concept that if you can develop a BNAB that's against viruses that are sensitive to it, that you can actually provide high levels of protection. But like combination antiretroviral therapy, it's likely that we need combination BNABs in order to broaden the neutralization and provide higher levels of efficacy. And so we do have now a number of different targets, BNABs against a number of different envelope targets, as shown here, and circled in blue are those monoclonal antibodies that are in our network program that are being tested individually and in combination, with the hope that we can come up with a combination approach that would provide protection against HIV acquisition. So I'll close by talking about vaccines that induce broadly neutralizing antibodies. And there are a number of different approaches to try to do just that. It's been really the the difficult task of the HIV vaccine field, but there's been a lot of progress in the last couple of years. There are stabilized trimers designed to elicit bNAbs or to boost after either lineage-based or germline targeting vaccine designs. Lineage-based vaccine designs are really derived from a sequence of, it's following the evolution of bNAb development in people living with HIV and trying to recreate that. Germline targeting is engineered to broadly activate diverse precursors within a bNAb class and then boost with immunogens that are more native-like. And then there's epitope-based vaccine designs that are designed to focus the response on one or more particular epitopes, but is germline agnostic. So we have a number of different strategies. We have a number of different platforms that we're using to try to test these, including nanoparticles, viral vectors, and mRNA, which is a new approach, which is quite exciting and gives us the opportunity to iterate rapidly because you can recreate new mRNAs quite rapidly. This is the pipeline of phase 1 studies in the HVTN over the next couple of years. And what you can see is that the majority of these are actually vaccines that are attempting to induce broadly neutralizing antibodies. And we have quite a robust pipeline of these various approaches that will be tested over the next couple of years. And so I wanted to end by thanking the executive management team, Larry Corey, and all of the others, everyone involved in the HVTN, our colleagues at DAIDS, all the site staff, our global CABs, and all the participants in our clinical trial programs. And thank you very much.
All right, so can everyone hear me? I've been asked to shorten this, but I wanted to do justice, and it's such an honor for me to introduce my friend and colleague, Peter Hunt. He's professor of medicine in the Division of Experimental Medicine, co-director of the UCSF Gladstone Center for AIDS Research, and his primary focus is on inflammatory consequences of HIV. He runs an incredible NIH-funded program and was recently chair of the Inflammation Committee of the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. But I do want to say, as a cardiologist, what I truly value about Peter is I view him as the HIV immunology whisperer, and that is his incredible ability to explain immunology in a way that's understandable and yet not condescending. And so I think we all really treasure him for this. So I'm so pleased to introduce Peter to speak today. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Priscilla, for that kind introduction. And here are my slides. So to set the stage, and I'll try to speed up because I know that we're running behind time. So to set the stage, the life expectancy of people living with HIV in the modern treatment era has steadily been improving, but a gap still persists compared to people without HIV. It's about 9 years. And that gap can extend to as much as 20 years in people who start HIV therapy at much more advanced disease stages. And what's more, people with HIV are at higher risk for many aging-related morbidities, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and a whole host of other complications. And they get these, on average, about 15 years earlier than people without HIV. Even in people who start ART at very early disease stages, they're getting these morbidities about 10 years earlier. And so why is that happening? Well, health-related behaviors almost certainly play some role, as does AR toxicity to a limited degree. But we and many others at UCSF and elsewhere established very early on that despite effective ART, inflammation persists in the body, which may contribute to an increased risk of disease. And this study by the Insight Network drives this home, where those with the highest levels of inflammation have a 20% risk over the next decade of experiencing a severe non-AIDS event, a heart attack, cancer, et cetera, or death, compared to just 5% in people with the lowest levels. And so our field's goal is really to move people with high inflammatory states down to lower levels. So how might we do that? One of our lead candidates is the anti-inflammatory cholesterol-lowering drug statins. We know that they decrease immune activation in people with treated HIV infection. Now there's a new clinical endpoints trial called REPRIEVE, which is now fully enrolled, over 7,000 people around the world. Without current heart disease, but with treated HIV, randomized to pitavastatin or placebo. And we'll find out whether statins actually reduce cardiovascular events, but also other inflammation-related morbidities like infections, cancers, and fractures. And this has the potential to change treatment guidelines. For the next series of potential interventional targets, we have an army of multidisciplinary teams here at UCSF exploring the inflammatory mechanisms behind many of the comorbidities that are increased in HIV, ranging from CNS disease all the way to cardiovascular disease. And how do we target inflammation? I like to use a tree analogy to describe this, where the leaves are the many end organ diseases. The root drivers of the inflammatory state include HIV itself, microbial translocation or a leaky gut, and asymptomatic CMV infection, which is highly prevalent in people with HIV and contributes to inflammation. The branches are the many immunologic perturbations that give rise to the downstream consequences. And the hope for our field has been that we might identify a tree trunk, a common set of inflammatory pathways that are driven by all the roots and give rise to all the downstream complications. And Priscilla has actually been, Dr. Sue, a real pioneer in this area, where she's conducted a clinical trial of the IL-1 beta inhibitor canakinumab, showed that it reduced not only inflammation in people with HIV, but it also, reduced vascular inflammation using FDG PET imaging. Now, while it may not have reduced all inflammatory pathways, and there may be some infection risks associated with this intervention, it really paves the way to think about how we might apply anti-inflammatory therapies in this setting. Our own group has also targeted some of the root drivers, including asymptomatic CMV infection, which we showed in an earlier trial of valganciclovir profoundly lowered levels of immune activation, markers that strongly predict vascular events and type 2 diabetes risk in HIV, quite large effect sizes. And so we're just about to start a large clinical trial in the ACTG of letermovir, a very specific and well-tolerated CMV medication, to see if reducing CMV replication reduces morbidity and vascular inflammation in the context of HIV. And this is a team effort that takes not just researchers, but also HIV advocates that are pushing the research agenda forward and promoting new care paradigms to care for people with HIV that are aging and to promote resiliency as people get older with their infection. And our clinics are also responding to this. Locally, the Golden Compass program at Ward 86, led by Meredith Green, taking a geriatrics approach to care to help improve the health of people living with HIV. So with that, I'll stop because I know we're behind time, and we can move on to the next speaker.
Hi, I'll start off with the next introduction. My name is Fran Awika. I'm a clinical pharmacologist who has led an HIV-focused pharmacology laboratory for many years. It stems back to the onset of the epidemic. So I've been around for a number of decades now and have had the privilege to witness the works of Drs. Volberding and Levy from the very early years. And of course, the evolution of HIV therapeutics, which you've heard AZT mentioned, the remarkable PIs that changed the face of HIV. And then of course, our ability to move from a domestic setting to really try to address the epidemic on a global scale to reach the world's most vulnerable populations. So with that, I want to now have the privilege and the honor to introduce one of our international leaders in the area of HIV therapeutics, and this is Dr. Annie Lutmeyer, who is a professor of medicine in the Division of HIV, Infectious Diseases, and Global Medicine at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. She's widely known as the principal investigator of the UCSF AIDS Clinical Trials Group Unit, and she's also widely known for her seminal research in TB therapeutics. She directs the San Francisco General Hepatitis and HIV Research Center, which focuses on innovative strategy for treatment and is highly regarded as well among our scientific community as a leader and expert for clinical trials examining novel therapeutics and preventative strategies for COVID-19, including antivirals, anti-inflammatories, and vaccinations. She is indeed our go-to expert on this topic. Lastly, Dr. Lutmeyer is the co-PI of the NIH-funded DoxyPEP study examining the use of doxycycline to reduce sexually transmitted infection in men, and the co-founder of End Hep CSF, which is an initiative to eliminate hepatitis C in San Francisco. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Lutmeyer, who will speak on current status of HIV treatments.
Thank you so much, Fran, for those kind words and for including me today. I had the good fortune to work with Paul for a year at the VA and was inspired by Paul and Jay and the incredible San Francisco care and research environment to pursue a career in HIV. As someone who is now on the front lines of the evolving COVID epidemic, I've drawn enormous inspiration from the HIV pioneers who've come before us to show us how to have the courage, compassion, and perseverance in these trying times. So I really just want to recognize that and thank you all for your inspiration. I have been asked to talk about treating HIV in 2021 and also to shorten my talk, and I will do both. And I want to focus on, well, really, what more can we ask for here? Joe, I am not able to move forward. There we go. If that's, maybe I'll do it through here. So it is pretty remarkable, as has been highlighted by other speakers, where we are today in terms of the effective care and treatment of HIV. We have single tablet regimens. At least 3 are in the first-line single, at least 3 first-line single tablet regimens are in the DHHS guidelines. We have 11 available total. That is mind-boggling when we think back to the state where we were before with many, many pills that were poorly tolerated. As has been highlighted, we have monthly injectables that are now approved for every 4 weeks and potentially moving towards every 8 weeks. This is a wonderful option for people who want an intramuscular shot as an alternative to oral therapies. And really, when we go to clinic every day, we can say to our patients that we have highly effective, well-tolerated therapy for the vast majority of people. And this includes those with hepatic and renal comorbidities, and for those even with some of the most terrible resistance patterns, we have excellent therapies for them. So what's the issue here? My colleagues who are outside of HIV say, my goodness, you have more medicines than many of us have. What do we need to do here, and why is HIV antiretroviral research even still on the radar? Well, I think as we all who are familiar with this field know that we really can do better. We right now need to put people on therapy for life, and we want to start them as soon as possible. So we need to find ways to continue to reduce and eliminate long-term toxicities. We need to avoid antiretrovirals with low barrier to resistance, which are still problematic. We need more long-acting options, and Mallory highlighted some of these weekly, monthly, yearly options. And we need to really move towards a worldview where we have a variety of administration routes, very similar to contraception, where we know one size doesn't fit all, when you want people to have the option of something implantable or injectable or oral, and especially including reversible, as this may help us to avoid the issues that we currently have with a long-term tail. So I wanted to just take a moment and highlight really some snapshots of exciting areas of antiretroviral research that are helping to address some of these unmet needs. And this is by no means meant to be comprehensive, but really just highlighting some exciting areas that will hopefully help to move our field forward. So antiretrovirals for the long haul, as I mentioned, we need to minimize side effects and maximize suppression. And even though we have really terrific and well-tolerated medications right now, we know that they all have side effects. So the integrase inhibitors are associated with weight gain. We know that there are bone and renal effects with the tenofovir-based regimens, and there's some overlap here with TAF as well, which may cause weight gain, a low resistance barrier with some of the NNRTIs, and still struggling with lipid and coronary artery side effects with the PIs and abacavir. So one innovative study that is moving forward through the ACTG is designed to address this question of what do we do for people who have gained weight while starting an integrase inhibitor and tenofovir-based therapy? Can we try to change them to an NNRTI-based regimen, either with TDF or TAF, or has the horse already gotten out of the barn? So we really need to understand what to do now that we have recognized that weight gain can occur and have innovative strategies to really, in a scientific way, address how best to remediate weight gain on antiretrovirals as we look at the future and the obesity epidemic that's facing the United States, including those living with HIV. Two other agents that I think are really exciting. One is islatravir. We've talked about the need for new medications, both with different mechanisms of action and different mechanisms of administration, and islatravir does both. This is a nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor. That's a mouthful, an NRTTI. And it both blocks translocation as well as delays chain termination. And in the latter, we know that it is effective. It is not susceptible to RT-associated resistance mutations, so retains activity against some of the common new resistance mutations that we see. It has up to 190-hour half-life, which allows for both weekly oral administration as well as a yearly implant. And is being developed using the Nexplanon contraceptive applicator. I'm showing some of the PK data below with the once yearly implant data being developed for PrEP, but we're excited to see islatravir move forward for antiretroviral treatment as well. So islatravir is being paired with an NNRTI doravirine in the Illuminate platforms as daily oral therapy in a whole variety of patients, naive, switch, and experienced. Also being looked at as a weekly oral therapy with a novel NNRTI, 8507. We were disheartened to see lower CD4 cell counts, but hope to learn more about this platform and whether this is going to be indeed a persistent issue. And then, as I mentioned, the implant, which is very exciting for PrEP, and we need to have agents to pair islatravir with for antiretroviral therapy for people living with HIV. But this is actively under investigation. Lenacapavir is another agent that has a lot of us very excited. This is a novel mechanism of action as a capsid inhibitor that also interferes with multiple steps in the viral life cycle. The PK supports every 6 months dosing as a subcutaneous administration, as well as weekly dosing as an oral pill. And I'm just highlighting some of the data from an earlier study looking at lenacapavir in the Capella study that looked quite effective when added to optimized background therapy. Some studies that are investigating how we can use agents like lenacapavir include lenacapavir being given subcutaneously in conjunction with a combination 2-nuke regimen, and then if people are suppressed, then stepping down to 2-drug therapy with lenacapavir with one other agent. Lenacapavir is also being explored in conjunction with islatravir as a weekly oral regimen. And we all look forward to hearing more about how we can best use lenacapavir and how it is tolerated when we have more long-term data. Lastly, I want to focus on the broadly neutralizing antibodies, which Dr. Bookbinder mentioned. We now have quite an array of broadly neutralizing antibodies that target a number of different epitopes in the HIV envelope, ranging from the CD4 binding site to the B1, 2, and 3 glycans and GP41. There are a variety of combinations of these broadly neutralizing antibodies which are being evaluated in conjunction with some of the novel agents I mentioned. So lenacapavir being given with dual bNAbs that have non-overlapping epitopes in the envelope. We look forward to hearing more from this study. The ACTG is evaluating dual bNAbs given with an IL-15 agonist, and this is really on the road towards more of an HIV cure strategy where antiretroviral therapy will be interrupted. And then the ACT is also evaluating intramuscular cabotegravir, an integrase inhibitor, given in conjunction with every 8 weeks IV broadly neutralizing antibody. Again, highlighting the many different ways that we can combine these new classes of drugs with novel mechanisms of action and of administration to try to move beyond expecting that everyone will take a pill every day or forever. So I will conclude by saying that I started with a glass that was half full or half empty. I think we all recognize that this cup is quite full, and we're delighted to have numerous well-tolerated, highly effective options for antiretroviral treatment. But I think it's also clear that our work in the HIV research community, including the ACTG, is not done. We need to really continue to try to reduce and eliminate long-term toxicities while people face decades of antiretroviral therapies. We still look for regimens which spare our current commonly used antiretroviral classes as people develop resistance or intolerance to some of these. We need to have non-oral regimens in a variety of combinations, not only for people who prefer to take different regimens, but also for the people that we recognize who just cannot take a pill every day for whatever reason, and in whom alternative mechanisms, including long-acting, may be life-saving for them to overcome barriers to taking a medicine every day. Longer-acting antiretrovirals are wonderful to see, but we need those that have a higher barrier to resistance. And I think the jury is out about how long we can go. Can we get out to monthly antiretroviral therapy, yearly antiretroviral therapy? What about every several years with a reversible implant? And I'm glad to see that really the sky is the limit here. I will stop in the interest of time and want to thank the organizers for including me here and for highlighting the really exciting world of antiretroviral research, which is alive and well.
I think I should just launch right into the next piece here. I came to AIDS activism around the time of the International AIDS Conference in the late 80s, early 90s in San Francisco. There was a flurry of media attention on the unauthorized study of an alternative therapy, Compound Q, supported by Project Inform. Sitting in my living room, I watched Paul and Martin Delaney, Project Inform's founder, debate the wisdom of ethics of Compound Q trials on television. The story of Q is the story of AIDS treatment activism, the AIDS underground, and the tension between science and community desperation. Paul spoke with clarity, compassion, and conviction in those interviews, as did Martin. Paul called Martin out on the irresponsibility of encouraging the use of a therapy that hadn't been tested for safety, and Martin restated the reality of desperate patients and a burgeoning underground supply chain. What moved me was the way these men seemed to be at once at odds and aligned. Under Paul's leadership, an authorized study of Compound Q was being launched. Witnessing this unfold was a lesson in the possible, the possibility of being critical and working together constructively, of working beyond differences and on remaining focused on what mattered. I didn't know at the time that I would go on to work with Martin Delaney at Project Inform, or that I'd end up terrifically interested in immunology, basic science, and pathogenesis. It was inevitable with these interests to cross paths with Jay Levy, first by reading and listening to his presentations, and later through his participation in our immune restoration think tanks, educational forums, and events. Certainly Jay's contribution to science are impressive, but equally impressive to me is Jay's patient-centered approach to his work and his effortless ability to both include and inspire others. Jay gave me a wonderful opportunity to be part of a rapporteur team for the basic science track of the 1998 International AIDS Conference in Geneva. At the end of each day's presentations, Jay and his team of mostly basic scientists and myself would assemble in a room and construct summary highlights for a lay audience. It was inspirational to watch Jay put out ideas, embrace critique, inspire thought, and move his colleagues, however tired, to act creatively. We'd start out tired and end up laughing. Time and again, I'd witness these same qualities create a kind of magic at our immune restoration think tanks. His ability to bring out creative inquiry in others is a relentless gift. I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to be among so many great thought leaders, including Martin Delaney. Marty was instrumental in forming the AIDS Underground and was the founder of Project Inform, a national AIDS treatment information organization. In the days before the internet, it was a lifeline for hundreds of thousands of people living with HIV, their providers, caregivers, and loved ones. We engaged in many forms of treatment advocacy, including convening topical think tanks to move the field of research forward towards a cure. It was because of these efforts that after Martin's death in 2009, the NIH launched the RFA for the Martin Delaney Collaboratories for HIV Cure Research in Martin's memory. His memory lives on in the work that remains. Some of that work will be highlighted by Melanie Otts and Steve Deeks, representing the HOPE and DARE collaboratories respectively. I will turn the program over to Melanie to further introduce herself and the HOPE collaboratory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And thank you everybody for inviting me. I'm the director of the Gladstone Institute of Virology and also a professor of medicine here at UCSF. Really honored to be part of the program and also presenting the collaboratories together with Steve. I co-lead the HOPE collaboratory. HOPE stands for HIV Obstruction by Programmed Epigenetics. And I co-lead it with Susanna Valente and Leshen Lovu. Next slide, please. So as Brenda mentioned, we are one of 10 Martin Delaney's collaboratories for HIV cure research currently. It's an enormous increase in numbers this year and really underscores the commitment of NIH to taking the next step and finding a cure for HIV. You might notice that here in San Francisco, we have two, the HOPE and the DARE collaboratories. HOPE is the new kid on the block, while DARE is in its third iteration, and Steve will tell you all about it in a minute. Next slide. Brenda also highlighted Martin Delaney's contribution to the AIDS pandemic. He's another San Francisco icon, a really important advocate for HIV research and accelerating treatment discovery. Next slide. So like other collaboratories, HOPE is multi-site, multinational, and even multi-continental. We have several laboratories here on the West Coast, including the Gladstone, the Buck, and UC Berkeley, but we also have a lot of laboratories on the East Coast, in Brazil, in Germany, in Uganda, and in Thailand. Next slide. The collaboratories, and HOPE is no exemption, is not business like usual. Also, a large focus is on science, as shown here. There's also an important partnership with the community. The San Francisco AIDS Foundation is the HOPE community partner. Our clinical cohorts, we work with cohorts in San Diego, Sao Paulo, Uganda, and in Washington. And we also have industrial partners really underscoring the urgency for translation. And we work with Constellation, Sangamo, and Amgen. Next slide. So what is HOPE all about? Our goal is very simple. We want to add HIV to the graveyard of retroviral DNA in our genome. We heard about Jay's foundational work in endogenous retroviral research. And these endogenous retroviruses are relics of previous retroviral invasion into our genome. In fact, 8% of our genome is retroviral, but these genomes are inactivated and powerfully silenced. And so we want to use modern technology to accelerate HIV's natural path to an endogenous retrovirus. Next slide. Like antiretroviral therapy, we're all about silencing the virus, but unlike antiretroviral therapy, we want to freeze frame the virus in the silence stage such that it is blocked beyond therapy and it is not rebounding. While we focusing in this silencing approach on the epigenome of the virus, which is the layer of regulation that is surrounding the genome, We also want to get to the heart of it, to the genome itself, and much like in endogenous retroviruses, want to introduce, using modern CRISPR technology, devastating mutations or excisions into the viral genome to permanently inactivate the genome. Next slide. This already works in cells and mice. We have inhibitors of the TUT protein that, if combined with the antiretroviral therapy, freeze frames the virus in a silent state such that the rebound after treatment interruption is delayed or even fully blunted. And next slide, we're working on combining these strategies with the newest CRISPR technology based in together with scientists at Jennifer Doudna's Innovative Genomics Institute in Berkeley, in order to very safely and precisely introduce these devastating mutations into the viral genome. Next slide. You can read more about our efforts in our website, hopeforhivcure.org. And with this, I hand over to Steve to introduce the DARE Collaboratory.
Thank you, Melanie. In the interest of time, I decided not to show slides, but also I want to just tell two quick stories about the DARE Collaboratory. So the DARE, as Melanie mentioned, we're in our third edition. We've been around since 2012. Actually, Brenda was instrumental in actually building the first DARE Collaboratory. But we've been up and going now for about 11 years. And a central theme of our work has always been trying to leverage CD8 T cells to either eradicate the virus or control the virus. Inspired and built on the work that Jay Levy described early on. And so Jay's sort of been a key part, at least, of our scientific agenda over the past decade. The second thing I wanted to mention about the DARE Collaboratory is our work with the AMFAR Institute for Cure Research, the UCSF-based Institute for Cure Research that Paul helped construct and then led for 5 years. And why I want to mention that is that the AMFAR Institute and this DARE 2.0 were sort of built in a way that they could leverage each other's strengths. And they did that. But the great thing that Paul did in the AMFAR Institute was to build a very robust community advisory board that was very representative and very engaged in the work that we're doing. And that's classic Paul. One of my favorite memories of my academic career was meeting in Paul's office, now Diane's office, back in 1993, 1994, with Paul and members of the community to discuss innovative, cutting-edge clinical trials that we tried to put into the clinic at the time, and were successful. The community, even though sometimes they like to pour fake blood on Paul and so forth, adored Paul because of his genuine goodness and his heart, and he was generally into what we're trying to do at that time, as was Tony Fauci. I mean, the two of them really were instrumental in building these links. And I'm saying that because the AMFAR Institute's CAB has now become the DARE CAB, and they've merged, and it's actually quite productive. And in fact, that CAB has now published 4 or 5 pretty impactful papers on how to do clinical research in the era of COVID. And I just wanted to recognize that. And I think that's one of the ongoing contributions that we're making with the DARE Collaboratory. So these are 2 things I wanted to mention. A third thing, just real quick, for those of interest in terms of where Cure is going now in the future, over the next 5 years, the International AIDS Society, with multiple members from around San Francisco and elsewhere, have just now published a strategy that's available online. It came out today. If anyone's interested in it, just give me an email, but it sort of provides a roadmap of where we're going. So with that, I think we're at the end of the agenda. Who do I send this back to? Is Diane, Monica?
Yeah, I think, Steve, I'll have Monica do 1 or 2 questions, and then I will close the program. So Monica, want to do 1 or 2 questions for our speakers?
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you, speakers, for talking about, number one, that was a wonderful program. And thank you, everyone, for contributing. A couple of questions. I think one to Melanie, you actually spoke on this, but can you elaborate a little bit more on the CRISPR-Cas technology around finding a sterilizing cure for HIV?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's actually 2 collaborators devoted to this. And Steve is involved in a clinical trial that is about to launch to test CRISPR-Cas9 in HIV infected patients in order to excise the provirus out of the genome. So there's pretty advanced stages here. We ourselves are involved in a clinical trial in Germany where we use a slightly different enzyme, a recombinase called BREC1, that is specifically trained on the HIV LTRs. So you don't need a guide RNA in order to target it. And it's also smaller than CRISPR to introduce and to test safety in people. So these are advanced stages. What we are also currently very much exploring more at an experimental stage still is to be even softer, even more minimally invasive in our genome editing approaches. Using actually CRISPR more as a targeting guide rather than really taking advantage of the nuclease activity of the protein. And this is done by fusing an inactive CRISPR to other enzymes, either those that can silence powerfully and can make an off state of the virus, and that's called CRISPR off. It's very heavily explored in the HOPE Collaboratory, but also we can fuse it with other enzymes that make just subtle nucleotide exchanges. These are called the base editors that we can also fuse on this. So these are 2 approaches that we very much focus on in order to minimize the damage that can occur when you really bluntly cut the genome or excise something out of it. So we're very much working experimentally currently, but hopefully more translationally in the future, and using these advanced tools that we have with CRISPR to be really minimally invasive in our genome surgery.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. So I think it's time to close the program. I just want to start by really congratulating Drs. Levy and Bulberding for all that they have done for the AIDS and continue to do for the AIDS movement. I want to thank the persons behind the scenes. Thank you, Lauren Sterling and Eunice Chang, for helping put this program together. I want to thank the speakers for their wonderful talks. And Monica, I want to thank you for organizing this with me. I think the program really, we didn't know what was going to happen. It really exceeded all expectations. You heard the excellence of the work that's happening. You saw collaboration all across within the university, with the university and community. You felt the fellowship really on this call. There were some really tear-jerking moments. And I hope you were as inspired as I was about the hope and the people working on the many challenges left in AIDS for the future. So thank you all for joining us on this World AIDS Day. And thank you, and please consider supporting all of our work. Have a great day.